They called her cursed. By nightfall, even the ground would prove she was telling the truth. The first stone didn't hit her. It landed short, kicking up a small cloud of dust near her boots, but it was enough to make her stop walking. The second one came closer, striking the wooden post beside her with a hollow crack that echoed down the main street. No one shouted. No one needed to. The silence carried more weight than anger ever could. Ethan Cole stood at the far end of the street, one hand resting loose near his belt, not on the gun, just there out of habit. He had been passing through, nothing more. A man with no reason to stay and no interest in trouble. But trouble has a way of standing still and waiting for you to notice it. The girl didn't run. That was the first thing he saw. Most would have turned, ducked, tried to disappear into whatever shadow they could find. She just stood there, dust settling around her boots, her dark hair catching the late afternoon light like something the wind couldn't quite claim. Strange, they said. That was the word passing between the townsfolk like a quiet agreement. Strange girl. Brings bad things. Shows up where the land shifts and the wells dry. Ethan watched the faces instead of the girl. That's where truth usually lived. Hard eyes. Tight mouths. Fear dressed up as certainty. One man stepped forward, slow, deliberate, like he wanted to be seen doing it. He bent, picked up another stone, weighed it in his hand. You don't belong here, he said, voice low, steady. The girl finally looked up. Not at him. Past him. Toward the horizon where the land stretched flat and endless under a sky that had seen too many stories like this one. I know, she said. Her voice didn't shake, didn't rise. It just was. Like wind through dry grass. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something small but stubborn. He stepped forward before he had time to think about it, boots pressing into the dirt, each step louder than it should have been. The man with the stone glanced at him, irritation flickering across his face. This ain't your business, Cole. Ethan stopped 10 feet away, close enough to be heard without raising his voice. Doesn't look like her business either, he said, nodding toward the girl. Yet here we are. The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't throw the stone. Not yet. That was how these things worked out here. Not with shouting. With waiting. Measuring. Deciding who would blink first. The girl turned her eyes to Ethan then, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade. They weren't the eyes of someone lost. Or broken. They were the eyes of someone who had already seen how this ended, and kept walking anyway. Something slipped from her hand. Small. Quiet. It hit the ground with a dull, buried sound, half swallowed by dust. No one else noticed. Ethan did. A key. Old. Iron worn smooth in places where fingers had held it too many times. There was dirt packed into its grooves, like it had been sleeping somewhere it wasn't meant to be found. The girl's gaze dropped to it, just for a second, and when she looked back up, something had changed. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. The ground remembers, she said softly. No one answered her. They didn't understand. Ethan wasn't sure he did either. But he felt it. The way the air seemed to hold its breath. The way the land beneath his boots didn't feel as still as it should. The man with the stone lowered his hand, just slightly. Not out of mercy. Out of something else. Something he couldn't name. Ethan bent, slow, deliberate, and picked up the key. It was colder than it should have been under a sun that had been burning all day. He turned it once in his fingers, feeling the weight of it, the quiet it carried. Then he looked up at the girl. What does it open? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Just held his gaze like she was deciding something that couldn't be taken back. Something that should have stayed closed, she said. The wind moved then, low and steady, carrying the smell of dry earth and something older beneath it. Ethan glanced down at the ground, just for a moment. And for the first time since he rode into that town, it didn't feel empty. The key did not leave Ethan's hand. He should have dropped it, handed it back, walked away like a man who knew better than to pick up what did not belong to him. But his fingers closed around it instead, slow and certain, like. The decision had been made somewhere deeper than thought. The townspeople noticed that. They always noticed the small things first. A man stepped closer, boots scraping against dry dirt, his voice tight with something that sounded like warning but felt more like fear. You do not want anything tied to her, he said, not loud, not angry, just steady in the way men speak when they believe something without needing proof. Ethan glanced at him, then at the others, and saw it clearly now. Not hatred. Not really. It was the kind of fear that grows quiet over time, the kind that settles into the bones of a place until no one remembers when it started. He had seen it before in other towns, other roads. Always tied to something buried, something no one wanted to dig up. Seems like it is already tied, Ethan said, lifting the key just enough for the metal to catch the light. That was enough to make the man take half a step back. Not much, just enough. The girl watched that movement, her expression unchanged, but there was something in her eyes now, something sharper. Not surprise. Recognition again. Like she had been waiting to see who would reach for the thing everyone else pretended not to see. You should not have picked that up, she said, her voice low, not accusing, not grateful, just stating a fact the way someone might speak about weather coming in over the hills. Ethan turned the key once more between his fingers, feeling the edges, the weight of it, the cold that had not warmed even in his grip. Feels like it was waiting, he said. She shook her head, slow. No, it was hidden. The wind shifted then, carrying dust down the street, soft against boots and wood and skin. Somewhere behind the buildings, a loose shutter tapped once, then again, like something keeping time. No one moved. The man who had held the stone finally let it fall from his hand, not throwing it, just letting it drop. The sound it made was small, but it carried. You bring her trouble, Cole, he said, but there was less certainty in it now. Less weight. Ethan did not answer right away. He looked down at the ground beneath his boots, the hard-packed dirt of a town that had stood long enough to forget what came before it, or maybe to pretend it had. He shifted his weight slightly, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like the earth answered. Not a movement anyone else would see, just a subtle give. Like something beneath was not as settled as it should be. He stilled. The girl saw it. Of course she did. It does that, she said. Ethan lifted his gaze. What does? Reminds you. The words hung there, quiet, heavier than they should have been. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath a man takes when he realizes he has stepped onto something he cannot simply step off. He slipped the key into his coat pocket, the metal brushing against fabric with a sound that felt louder than it was. That was when the mood shifted. Not sharply, not all at once. Just enough for every person on that street to feel it. The line had been crossed. The man who had spoken first shook his head, more to himself than anyone else. You are choosing this, he said. Ethan met his eyes. No, he said. It was already here. The girl took a step back then, the distance between her and Ethan widening just slightly, like she was testing something invisible. If you keep it, she said, you do not get to pretend you did not know. Ethan almost smiled at that, not out of humor, but recognition. I stopped pretending a long time ago, he said. That seemed to settle something in her. Not relief, not trust, just acceptance. She turned, slowly, like someone who knew exactly where she was going even if no one else did, and began to walk toward the edge of town where the land stretched open and quiet. Ethan watched her go for a moment, then glanced back at the others. No one followed. No one spoke. They simply stood there, as if the story had already begun and they had chosen not to be part of it. Ethan adjusted his hat, then stepped after her, boots pressing into the same dust she had crossed, each step carrying him farther from the kind of silence he had known before and closer to something that had been waiting under the ground long before he ever rode into that town. The town ended where the wind took over. Buildings gave way to open land in a matter of steps, like someone had drawn a line and decided nothing beyond it was worth holding on to. Ethan followed her across that line without hesitation, though every instinct told him a man should think twice before stepping into a place no one else wanted. The ground out there looked the same as anywhere else at first glance. Dry, flat, scattered brush clinging to life under a sky that gave more light than mercy. But the longer he walked, the more it changed. Not in shape, in feeling. His boots pressed down, and the earth did not answer the same way. It held something. Not soft. Not hollow. Just aware. The girl slowed her pace without turning, as if she could hear his thoughts catching up to him. You feel it now, she said. Ethan did not ask how she knew. He had stopped asking questions like that years ago. Feels like it is waiting, he said again, quieter this time. She nodded once. It always has. They walked another 20 yards before she stopped completely. No marker. No sign. Just a patch of land no different from the rest to anyone who had not been paying attention. Ethan looked around, scanning the horizon out of habit, measuring distance, direction, escape without meaning to. Nothing moved. No cattle. No riders. Not even birds. That was the second thing he noticed. Silence was not unusual out here, but this was something else. Even the wind seemed to pass around this place instead of through it. The girl knelt slowly, brushing her hand across the dirt with a familiarity that spoke of repetition, not discovery. Like she had done this before. Many times. Ethan watched her fingers trace a faint line in the ground, one that should not have been there. Straight. Too straight for nature. Someone tried to forget this, she said. Ethan crouched beside her, his knees settling into the dust, eyes narrowing as he followed the line she revealed. It stretched just enough to suggest shape. Not random. Not accidental. A boundary. Looks like they did a decent job, he said. She shook her head. For a while. Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out the key. The metal caught the light again, dull but certain, like it belonged here more than it had ever belonged in his hand. He held it just above the ground, not touching, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the air shifted. Not a gust. Not a breeze. Just a subtle tightening, like the world had drawn in a breath and was waiting to see what he would do next. You should not use it, she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something beneath it now. Not fear. Wait. Ethan glanced at her. Then why bring me here? She did not look at him. I did not. That settled into him in a way he could not explain. Not like a warning. More like a truth he had already stepped into before he realized it. He lowered the key slowly, his hand steady, even as something in his chest told him this was the point where things changed. The metal hovered inches above the dirt, and then, without force, without effort, it aligned itself. Not by his hand. By something else. A shape revealed itself beneath the surface, faint but undeniable. A square. Edges buried but not gone. A door. Ethan froze, just for a second, not from fear, but from recognition. The kind a man feels when he finally sees what has been in front of him all along. He pressed the key down. The dirt resisted at first, then gave way, not collapsing, not breaking, just parting enough for the metal to slide into something unseen. A sound followed. Soft. Deep. Not loud enough for anyone back in town to hear, but strong enough that Ethan felt it through his hand, through his arm, into his chest. Not a crack. Not a shift. More like something long held in place had decided it could move again. He pulled his hand back slowly. The key stayed where it was. The ground around it settled, but not the same way it had before. The line was clearer now. The shape more defined. The girl stood, stepping back 2 paces, giving the space room like it deserved respect. It knows you opened it, she said. Ethan rose to his feet, eyes fixed on the place where the earth no longer looked like just earth. What happens now, he asked. She finally looked at him, and for the first time, there was no distance in her gaze. Just certainty. Now, she said, you find out why it was closed. The wind returned then, low and steady, brushing across the land like it had been. Waiting for permission. Ethan reached down again, not for the key this time, but for the edge of something just beneath the surface. Wood. Old. Worn smooth by time and silence. He did not pull it open yet. Not fully. Just enough to feel the weight of it. Enough to know this was not a story he could walk away from. The ground did not feel empty anymore. It felt like it had been waiting for someone to finally listen. The wood did not move the way wood should. Ethan expected resistance, the stubborn weight of something buried too long, the kind that creaks and protests when disturbed. Instead, when his fingers pressed against the edge, it shifted with a quiet ease, like it had been waiting for that exact touch. Not forced. Not broken. Allowed. He paused, hand still resting against the surface, feeling the grain beneath his palm. Old wood. Yes, but not rotten. Preserved in a way that did not make sense under years of dirt and silence. It should not open like that, he said, more to himself than to her. It opens for the one who listens, she replied. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the door. He pushed again, just enough to widen the gap. The line of darkness beneath did not rush out. It stayed where it was, deep and still, like it had no interest in the light above. A faint scent rose instead, not decay, not anything foul, just earth and something older, something that carried time in it rather than loss. He crouched lower, bringing his face closer to the opening, listening more than looking. No sound came up from below. No movement. Just quiet that felt occupied. How deep, he asked. Deep enough, she said. That was not an answer. It did not need to be. Ethan leaned back slightly, considering. A man in his position would usually step away now. Close it. Leave it buried. But that was before the key. Before the way the ground had shifted beneath his boots. Before the look in her eyes that said this was not new to her, only new to him. He slipped his fingers under the edge again and lifted. This time, the door rose fully, slow and steady, revealing a square opening about 3 feet across. Inside, a narrow set of wooden steps led down, disappearing into shadow after 6 or 7 feet. No nails visible. No hinges. Just fitted pieces that had held together longer than most things out here ever did. Ethan let the door rest open, leaning it back against the dirt that had once hidden it. The sunlight touched the first few steps, but no farther. The rest remained untouched, like the light had decided that was as far as it should go. He stood there for a moment, measuring the distance with his eyes, the angle, the drop. Habit again. Always habit. You have been down there, he said. It was not a question. She shook her head. No. He looked at her, brow tightening slightly. Then how do you know what it is? She met his gaze without hesitation. Because I know what it holds. That settled heavier than anything else she had said. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small match and striking it against the side of his boot. The flame caught quick, bright against the dim edge of the opening. He held it out, lowering it slowly toward the darkness. The light stretched just enough to reveal more of the steps, each one worn smooth, edges softened by time or use or something else entirely. No dust shifted. No air moved. It was as if the space below had been sealed in its own moment, waiting. The match burned down closer to his fingers. He dropped it. It fell, a brief line of light tracing its path before disappearing into the dark below. No sound followed. Not even the faint echo of it landing. Ethan straightened slowly, his jaw tightening, just a fraction. That is not right, he said. She nodded once. No, it is not. The wind above them moved again, brushing across the open land, but it did not reach into the hole. It curved around it, like water around stone. Ethan stepped closer to the edge, boots firm, weight balanced. He looked down again, longer this time, letting his eyes adjust to what little light there was. Shapes began to form. Not clearly, not fully, just enough to suggest space beyond the steps. A room, larger than it should be. Someone built this, he said. Yes. Why hide it? Because it was never meant to be used again. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes when a man understands he is no longer standing at the edge of a simple choice. He reached down and took hold of the side of the opening, testing his grip, then placed one boot on the first step. The wood did not creak, did not shift. It held him like it had held others before. He paused there, 1 foot above, 1 foot below, caught between staying and knowing. Once you go down, she said quietly, you do not come back the same. Ethan did not look back at her. He kept his eyes on the dark ahead, steady, calm in the way only a man who has already decided can be. That is usually how truth works, he said. Then, without another word, he shifted his weight forward and began to descend, step by silent step, into something the ground had kept hidden long before he ever arrived. The air changed after the third step. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier, like it carried something that did not belong to the world above. Ethan felt it settle against his chest as he moved down, one hand brushing the side of the wooden frame, the other free, ready out of habit though there was nothing here to reach for. The light from above stretched thin behind him, fading with each step until it became a narrow line, then a suggestion, then nothing at all. He stopped halfway down, letting his eyes adjust, letting his breathing slow into something steady and deliberate. A man who rushes in the dark does not stay long in this world. He had learned that early. The steps ended sooner than expected, no more than 8 feet below the surface. His boots met packed earth, firm and level, not the loose soil he had expected. This place had been shaped, built with intention. He straightened slowly, shoulders easing as his senses began to map the space around him. It was larger than the opening suggested, maybe 12 feet across, maybe more. The walls were not carved stone, not timber, just earth, but held in place with a precision that felt deliberate, like someone had understood exactly how much pressure the ground could carry before it gave way. The darkness was not complete. A faint glow lingered, not from a source he could see, but from something that seemed to reflect memory more than light. Enough to outline shapes. Enough to tell him he was not standing in an empty room. He took one step forward, then another, each movement careful, measured, his boots making no sound against the ground. That was the first thing that unsettled him. Even dirt speaks when you walk on it. This did not. It accepted his weight without complaint, without response. Like it had already decided he belonged there. Ethan paused near the center of the room, his eyes catching on something ahead. Low, rectangular, a structure of some kind. He moved closer, slow, until the shape came into focus. A wooden platform, no more than 2 feet high, worn smooth along the edges. Not broken, not abandoned, preserved. There were markings along its surface, faint but deliberate, lines carved with care rather than force. Symbols, though not ones he recognized. Not ranch marks. Not anything used by men who built towns and fences. He crouched beside it, running his fingers just above the carvings without touching. Respect. Not fear. Just the understanding that some things carried weight beyond what they looked like. The air shifted again, subtle but present. Not a breeze. More like a presence adjusting to him. Ethan lifted his head slightly, listening. Still nothing. No echo. No drip of water. No sound of movement from above. It was as if the world had narrowed to this one room and whatever it chose to hold. He reached out finally, placing his fingertips lightly against the wood. The surface was cool, but not cold. Smooth, but not polished. Used. That was the word that settled in his mind. This had not been built to be forgotten. It had been built to be remembered, then hidden anyway. His gaze moved past the platform, scanning the rest of the room. That was when he saw them. Not clearly at first. Just shapes along the far wall. Upright. Still. He stood slowly, his posture shifting without thought. More alert now. More aware of the space behind him, the steps leading back up, the distance to the opening. He took one step toward the shapes. Then another. They did not move. Of course they did not. But something in the room changed with each step he took, like he was crossing a line that had not been meant to be crossed lightly. When he was close enough, the shapes resolved into something more. Objects. Placed with care. Not scattered. Not discarded. Arranged. There were bundles, wrapped in fabric that had held its form despite the years. There were small tools, metal dulled but intact, resting where they had been left. And there were carvings, similar to the ones on the platform, etched into pieces of wood and stone, each one different, each one carrying a meaning he could not yet understand. Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath steady but deeper now. This was not a place of storage, not a place of hiding. This was a place of keeping, a place where something had been left not to be lost, but to be protected from the wrong hands. He turned slightly, his eyes tracing the room one more time, taking in the order of it, the quiet intention behind every object. Then his gaze dropped, just slightly, to the ground near the platform. There, pressed into the earth, was a mark. Faint, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A footprint. Not his. Smaller. Older. Preserved in the same way everything else here had been. Ethan stared at it for a long moment, his mind turning over what that meant, what it suggested about who had come here last, and who had not left. Above him, somewhere beyond the layers of earth and silence, the wind moved across the land like nothing had changed. But down here, Ethan Cole understood something simple and unshakable. This place had not been waiting to be found. It had been waiting for the right person to finally see it. The footprint should not have been there. That was the first thought that settled into Ethan's mind, quiet but firm, like a truth that did not need to argue to be believed. The ground in that room did not take impressions easily. It held itself together too well, too evenly, as if time had passed over it without leaving a mark. And yet this one remained. Small, deliberate, preserved in a way that matched everything else in that space. Not recent, not fading, waiting. Ethan crouched lower, bringing his eyes closer to the shape pressed into the earth. The outline was clear enough now. Narrow heel, light step, not the stride of a man used to heavy boots and long miles. Someone smaller, someone who had walked here without hesitation. He reached out slowly, stopping just short of touching it. Not out of fear, out of understanding. Some things lose their meaning the moment you try to claim them. He straightened again, his gaze shifting back across the room, connecting the footprint to the platform, to the arranged bundles, to the quiet order that had been left behind. This had not been abandoned in a hurry. It had been left on purpose. The air pressed closer around him, not tighter, just more present, like the room itself had taken notice of what he was beginning to understand. Ethan turned slightly, looking back toward the steps, toward the narrow opening where the light from above barely reached. He could not see her from here, but he knew she was still there. Waiting. Not watching. Just waiting for him to see what she already knew. "You have been here," he said, his voice steady, carrying just enough to rise through the opening. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for the words to settle where they needed to. Then her voice came down, softer now, shaped by the space between them. No, Ethan's jaw shifted slightly. He looked back at the footprint, then at the platform again, then at the carvings along the wood. "Someone like you has," he said. Another pause. This one longer. The kind that carried more weight than the answer itself. "Yes," she said. That was enough. Ethan stepped back from the footprint, giving it space again, and moved toward the platform. His hand hovered above it once more, then lowered, this time with intention. His fingers traced one of the carvings, slow, following the line as it curved and crossed itself in patterns that did not belong to his world, but did not feel foreign either. They felt remembered. Not by him, by the place. A faint sensation moved through the wood under his touch, not a vibration, not a shift, just a subtle acknowledgement, like the difference between touching something empty and something that carries meaning. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as he followed the carving to its end, where it met a small indentation in the surface. Not deep, not obvious, just enough to suggest purpose. He glanced down at his coat, then reached into the pocket where the key had been. It was no longer there. He stilled, not surprised, not startled, just aware. Slowly, he looked back at the indentation on the platform. The shape matched. Of course it did. He did not move right away. He let the realization settle fully, the way a man does when he understands that the next step is not about curiosity anymore. It is about choice. "You knew this was here," he said, his voice carrying upward again. "I knew it would open," she answered. "That is not the same thing." Ethan almost nodded at that, though she could not see it. He reached forward, placing his hand over the indentation, feeling the outline, the fit that had been waiting long before he arrived. "What happens when it opens again?" he asked. The answer did not come immediately. When it did, it was quieter than before. "It does not open again," she said. "It finishes." That word settled deeper than anything else she had said. Ethan exhaled slowly, his fingers pressing just slightly against the wood, not forcing, just aligning. The room responded. Not with sound, not with movement, with presence. The carvings along the platform seemed to hold their shape more clearly now, as if something within them had been waiting to be seen in full. Ethan lifted his hand, stepping back half a pace, giving the platform space the same way he had given the footprint. He looked around the room one more time, taking in every object, every line, every mark left behind. Not evidence, not relics. Memory, held in place, protected, waiting. His gaze returned to the steps, to the faint line of light above, and then back to the platform. "This is not about what is down here," he said quietly. "It is about what was left unfinished." The air did not answer. It did not need to. Ethan Cole stood in that room, between what had been hidden and what was about to be understood, and realized something simple. The ground had not been keeping a secret. It had been keeping a promise. The word lingered in the room long after it was spoken. Finish. It did not sound like an ending. It sounded like something that had been waiting too long to be completed. Ethan stood still, letting that settle into him, the same way he had let the weight of the key settle into his hand earlier. Some things did not ask for permission. They waited until you understood them enough to act. His eyes moved back to the platform, too. The shallow indentation that had once held the key. It was no longer empty. Not visibly. But something had changed in the way the wood held its shape, in the way the carvings seemed to draw the eye inward instead of across. Like a story that had finally reached the part it could not skip. He stepped closer again, slower this time, his movements measured not out of caution but out of respect for what he now recognized as intention. This place had not been built to hide something from the world. It had been built to hold something until the world was ready to see it without turning away. Ethan placed his hand flat against the surface, not searching now, just acknowledging. The carvings beneath his palm felt warmer than before, not by heat, but by presence. as if they were no longer waiting to be understood. They were being remembered. The room responded again, subtle but undeniable. The faint glow that had outlined the shapes around him deepened, not brighter, just clearer. The bundles along the wall seemed more defined now, their forms no longer just objects but pieces of a pattern he could almost follow. The tools, the carvings, the placement of everything in that space. None of it was random. None of it was left behind by accident. It had been arranged to tell something. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting across the room as he let that realization take shape. This was not a place of loss. It was a place of record, not written in words, not carved for strangers to read, but held in the way everything was left exactly where it needed to be. His attention returned to the far wall, to the shapes he had only partially understood before. Now, as he stepped closer again, they revealed themselves more clearly. Not figures, not people, but objects that had once belonged to them. Items that carried the shape of hands that had used them, the purpose of lives that had been lived above the ground that now held them. Carefully placed, not discarded, preserved with care. Ethan stopped a few feet away, his shoulders settling as the meaning came together without needing explanation. This was not a burial. This was a keeping. A way to hold on to something that could not be carried forward any other way. He turned slightly, his voice rising again toward the opening above. This was not meant to stay hidden forever, he said. The answer came down softer than before, but clearer. No, only until someone could see it without taking it. Ethan almost smiled at that, though there was no humor in it. Just recognition. He had seen men take things like this before. Land, objects, stories. Always believing that ownership meant understanding. Always leaving something behind they never realized they had taken. He looked back at the platform, at the carvings that now felt less like symbols and more like boundaries. Not to keep people out, to keep meaning intact. And if the wrong person found it, he asked. There was a longer pause this time, the kind that carried history in it. Then it would stay closed, she said. Ethan nodded once, slow. That made sense. Not because of locks or barriers, but because of something simpler. A man who came looking to take would never have seen this for what it was. He would have missed the footprint, the placement, the quiet. He would have seen only what could be carried away. Ethan turned back to the footprint, still pressed into the ground near the platform. He walked to it again, stopping just short, looking down at the small shape that had outlasted everything else. This one, he said, his voice quieter now, more personal. They came back. The answer came without delay this time. Yes. Ethan let that sit. A return. Not to reclaim. Not to change. Just to finish what had been left incomplete. His gaze lifted slowly from the footprint to the platform, then to the carvings, then across the room as a whole. The pattern was complete now. Not because he had uncovered something hidden, but because he had understood what had been waiting to be seen. He stepped back once more, giving the room space again, the same way he had when he first realized what it was. His hand dropped to his side, empty now, the key no longer needed where it had once been essential. So this is it, he said quietly. This is what was waiting. The air did not shift this time. It settled, like something that had been held in place had finally reached the point where it could rest. Ethan turned toward the steps, his eyes lifting toward the faint light above, then paused halfway through the motion. He looked back one last time, not searching, not questioning, just seeing. It does not belong to me, he said. Her voice came down, steady, certain. No. Ethan nodded once, then again, like a man sealing something inside himself rather than closing something behind him. Then I know what comes next, he said. And for the first time since he stepped into that place, the ground beneath him felt still. Not waiting, not holding, just at peace. The decision did not come with noise. No shift in the air. No sign from the ground. It settled in Ethan the way truth always did when it finally reached a man who was willing to carry it. Quiet. Certain. He turned fully toward the steps, placing his hand lightly against the wooden frame as he began to climb, one foot finding each step with the same measured care he had used coming down. The room did not resist his leaving. It did not call him back. It simply remained, complete in a way it had not been before. Halfway up, he paused, not from hesitation, but from awareness. The space below him felt different now. Not waiting, not holding, just finished. He continued upward, the faint line of light widening with each step until it became the open sky again, pale and endless above him. When his boots touched the surface, the wind met him immediately, brushing across his coat, carrying the dry scent of the land like nothing had changed. But everything had. The girl stood where he had left her, a few feet from the opening, her posture unchanged, her eyes steady. She did not ask what he had seen. She did not need to. Ethan stepped away from the opening, turning back once, looking down at the space where the door still rested against the earth. From above, it looked smaller, simpler, like something that could be forgotten again if a man chose to forget it. He did not. He bent slowly, placing both hands on the edge of the door, feeling the same smooth grain beneath his palms. It was lighter now, not because its weight had changed, but because what it held no longer needed to be held open. He lowered it carefully, guiding it back into place without force, letting it settle into the earth the same way it had. Before, the line disappeared. The shape faded. Within seconds, the ground looked as it had when he first stepped onto it. Flat, unbroken, quiet. But Ethan knew better now. He straightened, brushing the dust from his hands, his movements slow, deliberate, like a man closing something that did not belong to him to begin with. The girl watched him, her gaze following every motion, not judging, not questioning, just witnessing. "It is done," she said. Ethan nodded once. Yes. They stood there for a moment, the wind moving between them, carrying no tension, no weight, just space. Then Ethan reached into his coat, his hand pausing for a second before pulling out what he had expected to find gone. The key. It rested in his palm, dull and worn, the same as before, and yet not the same at all. He turned it once between his fingers, feeling its edges, its weight, the quiet it carried. Then he stepped toward her, closing the distance with the same steady pace he had used since the moment he chose not to walk away. He held the key out, not offering it like a gift, not returning it like something borrowed, just placing it where it belonged. She looked at it, then at him, her expression unchanged, but something in her eyes shifted. Not surprise, not relief, recognition. She reached out and took it, her fingers closing around the metal with a familiarity that spoke of something older than either of them. For a moment, neither of them moved. The exchange was small, simple, but it carried more weight than anything else that had happened between them. Ethan stepped back, giving her space again, the same way he had given the room below space when he understood it. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked past him, toward the horizon where the land stretched out under the fading light. "Now it stays remembered," she said. Ethan followed her gaze, his eyes tracing the line where sky met earth, where stories began and ended without ever being written down. He nodded once, slow, then turned slightly, his body angling back toward the town he had walked away from. The buildings were distant now, small against the open land, their shapes softened by dust and distance. He could already feel the difference between that place and this one. One built on what was seen, the other on what was understood. He took a step, then stopped, glancing back at her one last time. She had not moved. She stood where the ground had been opened, where it had been closed again, her figure still against the vastness of the land. Not strange, not cursed, just part of something that had always been there, whether anyone chose to see it or not. Ethan tipped his hat once, a small gesture, nothing more, then turned and began to walk. His boots pressed into the dirt with a familiar sound now, the ground beneath him steady, no longer shifting, no longer holding anything back. Behind him, the wind moved across the place where the door had been, brushing over it like it always had, leaving no trace, no sign, nothing for a man to follow unless he already knew where to look. And ahead of him, the town waited, unchanged in its shape, but not in the way it would be seen by the man walking back toward it. By the time Ethan reached the edge of town, the light had shifted. The sun hung lower now, stretching long shadows across the buildings, turning wood and dust into something softer than it had been that morning. Nothing about the place had changed. The same crooked sign creaked above the saloon. The same wagon sat half-tilted near the well. The same men stood in small clusters, speaking in low voices that carried just enough to suggest they were still talking about her. About what they did not understand. Ethan slowed his pace as he stepped back onto the main street, his boots pressing into familiar ground that no longer felt the same beneath him. It was steady, solid, but it lacked something now. Or maybe it was him who had changed. The conversations quieted as he passed. Not completely, just enough. Eyes followed him. Some curious, some cautious, some carrying that same quiet fear he had seen before. But there was something else now. Uncertainty. The kind that settles in when a man returns from a place no one else dared to go and does not come back empty. He stopped near the center of the street, not because he had a reason to, but because it felt like the right place to stand. The man who had thrown the first stone earlier stepped forward again, slower this time. His posture less certain than it had been before. "You went with her," he said. It was not a question. Ethan looked at him, then at the others, letting the silence stretch just long enough to carry weight. "I walked," he said. The man's jaw tightened slightly. "And?" Ethan glanced past him, toward the open land beyond the town, where the horizon held steady and quiet like it always had. "And nothing," he said. That answer did not satisfy them. It was not meant to. A few of them shifted, exchanging looks, waiting for more. Waiting for something they could hold on to. A story. A warning. A reason to keep believing what they already believed. Ethan did not give it to them. He reached up, adjusting the brim of his hat, then stepped past them, moving toward the well. The bucket hung where it always did, the rope worn smooth from years of use. He pulled it up, slow and steady, the familiar creak of wood and rope filling the space where questions had been left unanswered. He drank without hurry, the water cool and plain, the kind that did not ask anything of a man except that he take it as it was. When he finished, he set the bucket back, letting it settle into place with a quiet thud. The man behind him spoke again, his voice lower now. "She is trouble," he said. Ethan turned slightly, not fully facing him, just enough to let the words reach him without inviting more. "No," he said. "She is not." The man frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "Then what is she?" Ethan paused, his eyes drifting for a moment to the edge of town, where the land began again, where the wind moved without asking permission. He could see her there, even if she was already gone. Not in sight. In memory. Standing still while everything else tried to move her out of place. "She is someone who remembers," he said. The words settled into the street like dust, quiet and unremarkable until you looked at them closely. No one answered right away. They did not understand. Not fully, but something in the way he said it made them hesitate, made them question, even if they would never admit it. Ethan stepped away from the well, moving toward the hitching post where his horse waited, patient, as always, head low, reins loose. He ran a hand along the animal's neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath his palm, the simple presence of something that did not need to understand to exist. He untied the reins, slow, deliberate, then placed one foot in the stirrup and swung himself up into the saddle. He did not rush. There was no reason to. He sat there for a moment, looking down the street one last time. The buildings, the people, the place that had not changed, and yet had. Not because anything had been revealed to them, but because something had been revealed to him. That was enough. He turned his horse toward the road that led out of town, the same road he had come in on, the same one that would carry him away. The man who had spoken earlier watched him, still uncertain, still holding on to something he could not quite name. "You were just leaving?" he called out. Ethan did not look back. "Nothing here for me," he said. It was not entirely true, but it was close enough. He nudged the horse forward, the hooves falling into a steady rhythm against the dirt, carrying him past the last building, past the line where the town ended and the land began again. The wind met him there, open and unbroken, carrying the same scent of earth and distance it always had. But now, there was something else in it. Not a sound, not a sign, just a quiet understanding. Behind him, the town would go on as it always had. People would talk. They would forget. They would remember only what fit into the stories they were willing to tell. But somewhere beneath that land, beneath the ground they walked on without thinking, something had been seen. Something had been finished. And out here, where the horizon stretched wide and honest, Ethan Cole rode on without looking back, carrying nothing with him, except the kind of truth a man does not speak about, because it is already written where it needs to be.